Hey everybody, what we're going to do today is we're going to analyze absolutism in Russia. So it's kind of the same thing that we've been doing throughout this unit. We're looking at these different nations in Europe and we're trying to figure out how did they embody this idea of unlimited, unchallenged, unrestricted power. And we're also looking at how did they use that unlimited, unimaginable wealth. Now, one thing I want to point out before we begin, did we ever talk about Russia in the age of exploration? Because if you remember, that's where all that money and resource was coming from that made the age of absolutism possible. That's how Spain did it, that's how France did it, and England. But did we ever talk about Russia exploring in the Americas or Russia exploring in Africa? Hopefully you're thinking no. So then how is Russia able to engage in the age of absolutism if they never did any exploration? If they never went and explored and got resources and brought them back, how were they able to do that? How were they able to compete in that balance of power? Well, hopefully you're starting to figure it out as you're looking at this map of Russia. This is a huge chunk of territory, you guys. Russia doesn't have to go exploring for resources because they're in its backyard. I mean, Russia, if you look at this, you guys, we've actually got 5 major river sources. Now, what rivers equal is irrigation, which equals farming. You're also going to have major timber resources. You're going to have oil. You're going to have minerals. Lots and lots of natural resources are going to come out of Russia. So therefore, you guys, Russia never had to explore. They were literally sitting on top of all the resources and all the wealth that they were going to need to engage in the age of absolutism. Now, the first monarch, or the first king, or in Russia, as they like to be called, the Tsar, taking after Caesar from ancient Rome, that we're going to see in Russia for the age of absolutism is going to be this gentleman right here, Peter. Now, in history, he's going to be known as Peter the Great, and we'll kind of see why. So one of the first ways, you guys, that he embodies this idea of absolutism, having unrestricted, unchallenged, unlimited, 100% total power, is this word right here, Westernization, okay? Now, what Westernization is going to mean is the adoption of Western ideas, technology, and culture to really change Russian life. Now, let me kind of explain a little bit more what I mean. One of the things that Peter will do when he is really young is he's going to travel a lot. And he goes to places like France, and he goes to Prussia and to Austria and to England, and he sees these nations and what they're doing, and he's really, really impressed by it. You know, he's seeing what they're doing culturally, architecturally, technology-wise. He's really impressed by that. Now, up until that moment, Russia had kind of been regarded almost as a backwards nation. Because if you think back too, we didn't really talk about Russia when it came to the Renaissance. So that huge explosion in learning and culture, it hadn't reached Russia just yet. They were kind of sometimes said to be still living in a dark ages. Well, that's all going to change now with Peter, because one of the big ways that he wants to compete in the age of absolutism and that balance of power is being westernized. So let me show you a couple things that Peter will do to embody this idea of westernization. Okay, so one of the first things that Peter will do to embrace this idea of westernization and show his absolute power, right, wants to make Russia seem like other European nations, wants to build a navy. Now, this is more than just having a military, right? Because Russia will have a military. That's without question. But you got to think, he wants to bring Russia up to par with other European nations, right? Oh, and you think about England. Remember, they're an island, you guys, sitting over here. Okay, here's England. They're the island. Peter wants to be able to compete with them. So he's got to build a navy. Now, up until this point, you guys, there'd been no reason to have a navy. I mean, the Arctic Ocean and the Bering Sea, that's what surrounds Russia. Now, these are completely unmanageable bodies of water. It didn't make any sense to have a navy, but now it does. Peter wants to be able to compete technology-wise with the other European nations. Now he's got to build a navy. But there's a problem, because you can't build a navy on these 2 bodies of water. It's not going to work. They're way too rough. They're way too cold. Therefore, Peter's got to do something before he can even begin to build his navy. He's got to get a warm water port. So warm water port. You guys, this is going to be essential for Peter to embrace westernization and demonstrate absolutism. He's got to get a warm water port. And this is where it's going to happen right here. All right. Now, this territory did not belong to Russia. Okay. Oops, let me go back. Actually, all of this belonged to these guys right here, to Sweden. But hello, this is, again, the age of absolutism. It's unrestricted, uncontrolled power. So because this territory right here is owned by Sweden, that doesn't matter to Peter, okay? See, this Baltic Sea right here is what he's really after. This is a warm water, essentially body of water. If Peter can get this Baltic Sea and access to that, that's going to allow him to build his navy. And if he's got a navy, you guys, then he can engage in trade with England. Then he can engage in trade with France, with Germany, with Prussia, with Austria. If he can get this warm water port, he can build his navy, he can westernize Russia, he can engage in the age of absolutism. Actually, he's going to have to fight 2 wars, you guys, with Sweden to gain this chunk of territory. But he does. And once he's got it, hello, what has everybody else done? You make a showpiece out of it. He changes the capital from here in Moscow to here in St. Petersburg. Remember, he had to fight a war with these guys twice to get this warm water port right here. It's the Baltic Sea. Because he couldn't do it anywhere else. All of that ocean right there, you guys, it wasn't suitable. He fights a war with Sweden twice, gains this warm water port in the Baltic Sea, moves the capital here to St. Petersburg, and then what do we always build whenever we gain? It's got to make a palace, you guys. Again, you think, okay, Peter is westernizing Russia. He's embracing all of these new, ideas, this technology, this new culture. He has fought 2 wars to gain a warm water port on the Baltic Sea. He moves the capital there. You got to build a palace. You have to, okay? Now, this palace, kind of the same way that when Louis wanted to build Versailles in France, it was like the worst possible place ever. It was kind of the same thing in St. Petersburg. There was an old story that actually this palace, it's known as the Winter Palace, was built on mud and bones. It took a lot of people, and a lot of people died making this palace happen. But remember, you guys, this is the age of absolutism. It's unlimited, unrestricted power. If Peter wanted a new palace built in his new capital on his new warm water port, he was going to get it. So this is what the Winter Palace looks like in St. Petersburg today. Remember, you guys, it's not just the size and scale, it's the grandeur on the inside. I love this picture of the Winter Palace because if you look, these are people. So this kind of gives you an idea of scale of how big the Winter Palace is. I mean, these are buses, okay? So again, it's not just the size, it's not just the scale, it's the grandeur on the inside as well. So this is perhaps my favorite example of how Peter kind of embodies westernization and how he demonstrates his absolutism. So traditionally in Russia, men would have long beards. It was not common at all to be clean-shaven. But when Peter travels to France and travels to England and to Prussia and to Austria, he notices that it's much more common for men to be clean-shaven. That's the new thing. Now remember, Peter is wanting to compete with the Western world now. So actually what he did is he went and he made men shave their beards off. They had to be clean shaven. So you guys, you stop and think about it. I mean, this idea of unrestricted power, Peter comes back from traveling and says, we're not going to have beards anymore. I mean, that's unrestricted power. He's going to tell you if you can or cannot have facial hair. Now, unfortunately, Peter cannot live forever. And we've talked to you guys, one of the characteristics in the age of absolutism is establishing a dynasty. And this is so important because if Peter's going to argue to you, why I do all the things that I do and why I should rule absolutely is that right is given to me by God. Well, you want that to stay within your family. You want divine right to continue on. So you have to have a dynasty. Well, this is going to get rather interesting, okay? So Peter's first wife, okay, bore him 2 children, a daughter and a son. Well, this is the one that was really, really important because we know that power passes from father to son. Well, there was kind of some scandal, and actually Peter accused his son Alexei of treason, and he ended up killing him. Now, he had a son who was Peter II, but he's going to die when he's only 3 years old, okay? But Peter does remarry. He has a second wife, okay? Now, his second wife will bear him 2 daughters. Now, we have a little bit of an issue, okay? And we have seen power pass from father to daughter. So actually, Elizabeth becomes the empress. Now, she's going to end up dying, but here's what happens. Peter III, actually his grandson from his daughter Anna, is who is going to come to power. Now, what's actually going to end up happening to Peter himself, there was different accounts. You know, some historians said that actually he went out and he tried to save some soldiers in the water and he ended up getting hypothermia. We actually know now that he had a really bad bladder infection, and that's actually what ended up killing him. It got gangrenous, it got into his blood, and Peter ended up dying at about the age of 52. But like I've shown you, you guys, it's actually going to be this Peter III who is going to end up taking power after Elizabeth dies. But what's even more important is this woman right here, Catherine, okay? Because Peter III is going to prove to be a not-so-capable ruler. Now, Miss Catherine, okay, she was not Russian. She was not Russian at all, okay? You remember, she's the wife. She is actually a German princess, and she comes in and she marries Peter III. But like I was saying, Peter proves to not be a capable ruler at all. So Peter III will end up dying. Now, there's a lot of scandal there too. Some people say that it was actually Catherine who killed her own husband to take power. Now, Catherine is going to be an absolute monarch, the same that her, I guess, grandfather, even though it wasn't biological, but her grandfather, Peter the Great, was. Now, Catherine will also be known as Peter the Great. She is going to embrace that idea of westernization the same way that Peter the Great did. One of the things that Catherine will do to, again, embody this idea of westernization and show her absolutism, she's going to gain another warm water port. Again, you want to be able to compete with these guys when it comes to trade. So Catherine is going to get her warm water port down here on the Black Sea. Okay, remember Peter the Great, her grandfather, well, grandfather not biologically, but grandfather to her husband, he got the warm water port here on the Baltic Sea for St. Petersburg. Now she gets hers down here on the Black Sea, right? So again, it's kind of how Peter the Great and then granddaughter Catherine the Great embodied these ideas of westernization and showed you how they were absolute monarchs.